Okay, welcome everyone to the grand final debates of Mini LDT 2020. Debate under the motion as an average students from lower socioeconomic class who live in developing countries. This house would choose a generalist career path over becoming specialist. Debating under the house as government team is Team Survival and TB. Applause.
Yay!
And acting as opposition team is Argument One. Here.
Here.
The adjudicating in this round will be led by Mr. Sulhalki.
Yay!
Paneling with him is Miss Hanuma Mafwani, Miss Iwan Suryadi, Mr. Yusuf Haryanto, and Zulkarnain.
Here.
Here.
Black judges.
Without further ado, I would like to invite the Prime Minister to open the debate. Please turn on your camera.
Wait. Okay, am I audible?
Yes.
Okay. I'm going to start my speech in 3, 2, 1. As an average student from a lower socioeconomy living in the developing country, we believe that our main intention or our main priorities is to get our ends meet, which is why we believe that as a lower income student, as an average student from a lower income living in a developing country, we would prefer to become a generalist rather than being a specialist. So first, our goal. So our goal here is that we want to gain a stable income for ourselves just to get our ends meet, to support ourselves, to support our family. So first, let's get to definition. So what is a generalist? A generalist is a person who has the capability to become just average in every kind of aspect. They are not really good, but they are also not bad. So they are doing just fine. But a specialist on the other side is someone who is extremely good, but only in one sector itself. When living in a developing country, we believe that being a generalist will be more beneficial for us as an average student in lower socioeconomic condition. I will get to this to that argument later on. So first, let's get to know developing countries. So in a developing country, the biggest problem that is faced is the high amount of jobless people across the country. And what the characteristics of developing countries is what they need the most is economic growth in their country. So in order to lift up the country's economic growth now on, these developing countries do not need experts in some fields, but rather a lot of job opportunities and a lot of applicants that can get into those job opportunities to save their country's economy as an effort to make their country more developed itself. Because as we know now, there is a high amount of people from the lower income that do not actually have jobs. Why? Because for some cases because they couldn't find a job that is suitable for what they actually learned, which is why we prefer to become a generalist that can do a lot of things to get a job later on that could contribute to our country's income, especially since now developing countries support a lot of small sectors and small business just to get a lot of jobs to help the country's economic itself. So second of all, let's get to know average students. So as an average student, especially in schools within developing countries, we aren't taught to become specialists in a thing. We are forced to become very good in one certain sector, but rather to be multi-talented. We believe that our main concern is, as an average student, is not being the best in one category, but rather to the point where we can just succeed, just basically succeed in one thing, or when that one thing fails, of other things as well. So which is why we believe that our main intention here is to get a stable income rather than really focusing into becoming one special thing. So first, let's take a look on the lower socio-economic class. So the lower class is the class that is actually getting the most hurt, especially in developing countries. They do not have the chances, they do not have privilege or the easy life as others in developing countries. The lower socio-economic class is probably the most poor rather than the whole people in other countries, or if you compare it to people in developing countries where these people have very hard time just to eat. They suffer a lot. Hunger is something they are very familiar with. Some of them cannot even afford to get books to actually learn to school, which is why most of them will become average students later on. So especially since these students' parents
Ma'am.
also come from a lower economic lower economic condition, we believe that our priority is just to gain a stable income and good income to support our families and also to get our ends meet themselves. So the argument from side proposition will be that I will deliver will be about why should we actually choose generalist as a career path. So first, because it fits with our current country's condition. So we explained to you before about how developing countries are especially seeking for jobs sectors. Given it becoming a developing country, the most common thing is their economic stability themselves. In developing country, people lose jobs fast, and to get a job, it is a very hard effort. So which is why we believe with this current condition where the job seeking is very unstable, as someone from a lower income country where our intentions is to get the best for ourselves and our families, we need to be multi-talented. We need to be flexible into fitting of any job sectors that are available in developing country, especially since the options are very limited themselves. So in case we fail in one thing, we can still work in other things, because our main priority is to get a stable income for ourselves. This is the only way for us to actually achieve that goal in a developing country where the job sectors are still very imbalanced and are very short. So it's also easier for us to find jobs in case of other bad situations. So second argument is about how it is the most rational decision for us. So as someone from a lower income, we struggle to get the ends meet, as I mentioned before. Food, we need to get food, we need to get hunger, we suffer. So on daily basis, what we think about is not rather how can I be the best in doing one thing, but rather how can I eat today? How can I get something to provide to my parents at home? We believe that our needs does not have to be gained exclusively from being specialists in one thing, but can also be gained in a much better way and easier way for us as an average student through becoming a generalist itself, because of our current country's condition, as I mentioned before. And also, we need to acknowledge now that specialist education, especially in developing country where there are still a bit of them, where there are still lacking specialists to actually teach, is very expensive. It takes a lot of money. Unless you are privileged and having a lot of money, or you can get scholarship where you need to be smart, which is those two aspects that we lack as average student in lower socioeconomic conditions, we cannot get this. It is very little chance for us to actually get specialist education itself, ladies and gentlemen. So we believe that later on, it's highly impossible and will be a highly hard task for us to actually get specialist education. If we actually try to pursue this, we would force a burden for our parents, for our family itself. Why? Because they need to find money for us to actually get this. Or second of all, we need to work harder. We need to be smarter. We need to read a lot. We need to read a lot more. But since we're coming from a lower income, it is very hard for us to actually get access to those things that can actually make us smarter to at least get something called a scholarship or etc. Which is why we believe that right now it is the most rational decision for us in status quo to actually choose to become a generalist, which is a much easier career process. We do not have to pursue a very high education like specialists. Before, it would take much less money for us, and we could become way more possible and actually making and having a lot of capabilities itself. We do not have to study extra hard. It's in line with our capabilities. So in the end of the day, we believe that our priority is not to waste money and become a generalist for us, because it is the most rational decision for us, for our country, our family, and our living condition. That's all from me. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the Prime Minister. To respond to the case, I'd like to invite the leader of opposition. Without any further ado, time and place are yours.
Hello? Am I audible?
Yes.
All right. Give me a minute to arrange my paper. All right. Wait. I'm gonna start my speech in 3, 2.
Can you turn on your camera?
Can you
Hello?
speak louder, please?
Okay,
Can
okay.
you turn on your
Yes. Ininya maksudku. Oh ya. Halo? Is it clear now? No, belum di mute. Belum di mute.
Can you
Yes,
turn on
clear.
your camera?
Alright. Halo?
Yes, you are clear, but turn on your camera, please.
Okay. Chilin dong.
BS? Bye.
Oh, God. Kenapa itu di situ? I'm gonna start. Belum. I'm gonna start my speech in 3, 2, 1. Member of the House, in our current status quo, in a developing countries, that they are lacking of the specialists in terms of a lot of things like engineer, technicians, or doctor, right? Therefore, as an average student from lower socioeconomic class who lives in a developing country, we think that it's better to choose a specialist career over generalist career, right? The only thing that I'm going to address is that the pragmatic benefits of being specialist towards the government, society, and students, right? First, like the oppositions was, the government was always mentioning that they, like there's a gap between the poor and the rich one, right? But we think that the gaps that they've mentioned, we think that it's no longer relevant when it comes to pursuing for specialist career, right? Because we think that yes, you might be, there might be gap of the financial things that in terms of, for in terms of living, for example. But we think that when it comes to education, we think that there is enough progressivity, right? We think that because we think that the education to become a specialist is getting more accessible at this current day and age, right? The government already provided a lot of scholarship, for example, or certain regulations that would help the poor people to get through that education to pursue the specialist career, right? In Indonesia, for example, like it's not only government providing for BM, for example, but the government is also providing regulations like UKT is based on parents' salary, for example, right? So we think that there is actually enough progressivity in our society that makes this career is getting more accessible to the society, right? Even if, for example, there's not enough scholarship to cover the cost of becoming specialist career, we think that the effort that has been conducted for these students, for these lower income students to pursue that career, we think that that is worth it, right? The cost is worth it, the sacrifice are worth it, right? Why? Because we think that at the end of the day, by becoming specialist, you will be paid off, right? The future career will be guaranteed, for example, because not a lot of people could be specialists, for example. You can also change your financial conditions to do the to have the better financial conditions in the future, right? it's also like you can also, it's just also part of investing for your for your better future career, right? So we think that these kind of efforts are worth it, right? Let's also talk about, when the government, when they are lacking of the specialists, it is very problematic, right? For example, when we are lacking of the specialists in medical, for example, right? This is very problematic because, for example, there are certain diseases like cancer, certain cancer, like like certain cancer that we cannot find a specialist in Indonesia. For example, a lot of people are finally going to abroad to find the doctors that could that could help them to solve to heal from that disease, right? Now it makes even it even makes more the gaps between the poor and the rich more obvious, right? Because now what's happening,
Sorry, is it only me?
Me too.
Me too.
Biasma.
Bios.
Would you like to please
when
pause
government
the
are lacking of one could
stopwatch?
access
Biasma.
could access to not everyone could access to that medical things. And now so we think that if the government could actually provide that, we think that it's
Biasma. Biasma.
the treatment, the idea of
Bias.
oh my god, hello.
Can you repeat on the apa tadi ya, dari certain cancer ya?
Dari cancernya.
Ya.
Problematik.
Tadi sampai mana?
Cancer.
Itu
Dari
menit
certain
berapa ya?
cancer.
Ya itu baru pertama kali nyebutin cancer. Ketika baru mulai lacking of specialists very problematic, for
Iya.
example in cancer.
Itu menit berapa kak? Ke berapa?
I don't remember.
Timekeeper siapa timekeeper?
Empat.
Okay.
Cek.
Oke.
Alright. I'm gonna start my speech in 3, 2, 1. What happened then when these people? What happened then when the government couldn't provide enough treatment for certain kind of disease like cancer? We think that the government couldn't provide the accessibility for people who are coming from the lower class, for example, to get the same treatment, for example, to get the same accessibility to heal themselves, right? Because they have to go abroad. That's what happened, for example, in Indonesia, when people are having certain kind of cancer, that they have to go abroad. But only people who are very rich, like artists, for example, or like celebrity, for example, that can only go outside and heal themselves, right? But for people who are coming from the lower class, then they couldn't get such a kind of treatment, right? Now what's happened when the government can actually like have the specialists, right? They can actually advance the medical technology, for example. They can actually government can actually provide more accessibility in terms of education, in terms of medical healthcare, for example. So a lot of different layers of the society can get the accessibility to those things, right? Which we think that it's very beneficial for society at large, right? Second of all, let's talk about that. Let's talk about in terms of business, for example, when government are lacking of the specialists, it is very impactful to the business or the economic growth that the government were really concerned about, right? Because we think that when the government, for example, when the government do not have the specialists, for example, in terms of engineer, for example, or technicians, for example, then the likelihood for investor to invest to Indonesia is very small, right? Because we think that when the investor, for example, they would like to invest to Indonesia, then Indonesia do not have enough specialists that could actually work that business out, then they are going to be hesitate to invest to Indonesia, right? Because it means that if Indonesia do not have enough qualified human resources, then it means that those investors have to bring their own labor, that they have to bring their own specialists, for example, right? So it costs more, right? That's reasons why not a lot of investors would like to invest in Indonesia, which is different, for example, compared to India, for example. Even though India is still developing country, but but they have a huge abundance of specialists, for example. That's reasons why in India city like Delhi or Bangalore, that they have a lot of company, international company over there, because there are a lot of specialists who are specialists in IT, for example. So a lot of company would like to a lot of company are interested to invest onto that thing, right? um all right, if the government concern was also into the economic growth, they didn't even explain to us how actually being a generalist that you can actually increase the economic growth, because we think that that's mutually exclusive, only happen under outside the house. Because under outside the house, when we have a lot of specialists, for example, that can actually running the business well, then that can actually very expertise in certain kind of fields, for example in terms of IT, for example, then we think that a lot of investor would like to invest in our country. And once a lot of investors are coming to our country, then it means that we can create more job field, for example, for labor people, for example, who cannot actually who cannot actually pursue other job, or they're jobless, for example, right? so we think that so we think that the benefits that will be brought by under us of the house is more beneficial, right? For the government's future also, we know that the idea of specialists, it's not only because we don't have specialists, for example, but even if we have a specialist, the number of specialists is very limited, right? We think that when we have enough more specialists, it's not gonna be limited anymore, and it could
Order,
be more accessible and gonna be more affordable
order.
for a lot of layer of society. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the Prime Minister. From the Leader of Oppositions. To respond the case, I'd like to invite the Deputy Prime Minister. Without any further ado, time and place are yours. Here.
Am I audible?
Yes.
I will start my speech in 3, 2, 1. Panels, the opposition side of the house seems like didn't think realistic enough of the current conditions of us as an average student with a lower socio-economic class, because they always bring in example of that high educations that this student can achieve. Well, in fact, that they cannot really explain about how the way this average student with lower economic class can really achieve that. Now I want to give some response to the opposition side of the house. First, they are talking that our country as a developing country is lacking of the specialists, because here in our country, in developing country, we think that it still can be covered by the person who have higher economics income, who go to the college and actually being a specialist. And the fact that there are so many specialists are being graduated every year, so it is enough for our country, and there are still so many actors and people who can fulfill the specialist needs in our country. Because as a lower economic student, we cannot afford all of the fees and all of the essentials to become a general, because it is very expensive, and we want to think realistic as a student. And secondly, they're talking about that it's already accessible enough to become a specialist and to get education for scholarship. We think that it is only for smart student, right? Well, we as the average student, we cannot have that because our ability is not that high and we are not that smart. So to get a scholarship or especially there's two ways that we can get. First, that we have to be smart, and secondly, we have to have a good economic. Well, we as the average and from lower social economical student, we don't have two of it, because we only have like a very skill that we can use to looking for a job, for example. And there's so many privileged people that can using the ways or scholarships to become a generalist, because even though it is scholarship, it still needs a budget to preparing for that task for a specialist, for example, and preparing anything that so you can live the specialist life. Plus, when your college is specialist, if maybe all of your school tuition fees is covered, but not your daily life needs, right? Because we still need money to fulfill our daily life needs. Well, we think that it is better to use for fulfilling our family daily life, for example. For example, in Indonesia, if you want to be a like internal medicine specialist or any engineer, you have to prepare millions, hundreds of money to afford the educations. Well, we don't have some, so we better to fulfill our needs as a average student from the lower socioeconomic class. And yeah, and now why we think our proposal as a lower average student from lower socioeconomic economic class would better choose the generalist path. The first point is that because we want to be extensions about realistic way. Second of all, thinking about our developing country, which is always like moving in our circumstances, and how this will increase our country's economical growth. The first one is about the realistic way. As a lower socioeconomic class student, we would like to pursue the realistic way for us in the future. Since being a generalist is the person who knows something about a lot of subjects, so it means that they know something about every type of skill and occupations. And from that, this lower economic student will have a transferable skill for their future path and a flexible career, so they don't have to stick to a particular job in the future days. Because we as the average student, plus we are from a lower social economic class of the society, we want to be realistic, which is having a job first is important to us. So as long as we can get a job and earn money, then the rest of it can be think later on. So as these lower socio-economic classes, we have so much needs that have to be fulfilled. And much needs means that we need much money to living our family, to eat, to get health access, and so on and so forth. So as the student in a lower socio-economic class, to fulfill our needs in the future days is what is important and becoming our priority, and that is why having a job first is more important to us. And at the very first place, this average low socioeconomic student have a different starting point from the higher socioeconomic class. And we can say like this because at the very first place, in the reality, the interest of the lower socioeconomic class student doesn't even think that far to continue their college to become a specialist, because they are not able to do so or even to become a specialist. As my first speaker explained, that it needs more money to become a specialist one. While we compared to our real conditions as a low economic class student, we only have less money and limited money to become a specialist. So we want to think rationally about how we can get a job and how we can get money and how we can get food to eat and another secondary needs of our family that we have to fulfill. So that is what generalist occupation is, what is fit to us. Second one is that thinking about our developing country.
Sorry, here I'm
Yes.
lagging.
Yes.
Do you guys same?
No, I'm
We
fine.
are fine. We are fine. We
No.
are fine. Go ahead, Chiquita.
Now, talking about developing country. Developing country means that the country is unstable, which means that the seasons and the circumstances are not always stay as circumstances. Because in order to develop, the country is changing and the government cannot handle this socio-economic student enough, since there are still many things to think about. Even when there's a Ministry of Education after they that is prepare for a scholarship, after they graduate, they cannot handle the future life of the student, right? Even when there's Kartu Indonesia Pintar Kuliah for continue college, it still cannot be afford the daily needs of the student and all of the stationery for the student. When they're studied to become a generalist, so the proper when they study to become generalists. So the proper decisions for us as an average student, especially to choose the generalist career path. So they can hold in any circumstances because they know something about any subject and it can be transferable. So here's the scenario. At the time, if this developing country have an economical crisis, which will harm the lower socio-economic class more, this average student can still looking for any shortcut and apply their various skill, so they can doing any job and still can get income, even when the worst scenario happens in the end. So the third one is that being generalist can be achieved, but not as our priority as our lower socio-economic average student, because we believe that this can be achieved later after we have a stable economical situation first. Because if you as the opposition side of the house will say that the future stability is more guaranteed when they become a specialist, we don't think that it is a rational mindset, because in the real life at that time, we still need to pay for debt, for example, and not starving and can help our parents to lighten their burden, and we actually would think to work any job first. Since the process time and much more money just for one specific skill, so the most rational decision for us is become generalist itself. Because if you want to be an engineer, for example, like architecture, you don't only have to think about the school tuition free, but you have to think about you have to prepare about all of the essentials, which is the essential for become an engineer and become a doctor. Of the books you have to really prepare for that money, which is we as an average student, which is not really that like smart enough to become that specialist, and we don't have that much money to afford our school tuitions and so on and so forth. When we are become a generalist, in that time we think that being a generalist is fit to us, and that's why we were proud to propose. Thank you.
Thank you for the speech. To respond the case, I'd like to invite the opposition's whip. Without any further ado, time and place are yours.
Di LO nggak sih?
Yes, I'm sorry, the deputy leader of opposition. Time and place are yours.
I'm sorry, I need more time to arrange my papers. Test, test. So I'm gonna start my speech. In three, actually, okay, I'm sorry. I'm going to start my speech in 3, 2, 1. Let's move directly to the rebuttals. First, before, we're going to ask a question, right? Why in government side of the house, the prolonging suffer is better? Because we say that as a student from lower income economic class, we want to have a better future, and I will explain further in my argument. So, firstly, they talk about first clarification, right? They talk about how there are a lot of general specialists graduated from developing countries. However, we say that we live in Indonesia, we live in developing countries. There are more generalists in graduated in developing countries, right? And the question is, if there are many specialists, why then our resources is still limited, right? Because we say that the benefit of becoming a specialist is it is likely for you and it is easier for you to shape yourself, for example, to become a generalist. When you become a generalist, it is not likely for you to change to become a specialist. So the clarification is, we say that yes, the graduated people, for example, from the bachelor degree, we can say them as specialists. However, it is still the first degree of specialists. Like, for example, I graduated from the chemistry major. If I want to go to the lab, for example, I want to work in the lab because I only graduated from S1, from S1, for example. I only able to manage the very basic things, for example, in the lab. However, if I want a further and more specialist, I have to pursue higher degrees, and I will explain later why is it better, right? And then they talk about how they want to get stable income, right? But the question is, how are you going to get stable income? Because in your side of the house, you're saying that it is easier for us to get a job, but we say that when it is easy for you to get a job, it is also easy for you to lose the job. Why? Because your kind of job is shifting, right? It's changing. When you say that the characteristic of developing country is changing, especially in the pandemic time, let's look at the parameter of people, right? The generalists easier to lose their job compared to the specialists. Why? Why? Because the generalist is easy to lose their job.
POI?
No, thank you. Thus, we say that it is more risky for you to become a generalist, especially the characteristic of generalists that you move from one corporations to other corporations and so on and so forth. And then the first speaker said that development don't need specialists. No, we do need the specialists. No, thank you. And then secondly, they talk about how we're from lower class, we're poor, and so on and so forth. Let's look in developing countries like me, for example. My parents want to sacrifice a lot. They want to sell their houses. They want to sell their rice fields, sawah. They want to sell a lot of assets for my educations so that I can become a better and I can fix the economy better for my family and so on and so forth. We say that this kind of consciousness of wanting to change and survivability exists and valid, right? Because we want to try to provide a better life for our parents in the future. On your side, it is likely that you are going to prolong the suffer, right? No chance to have a better life and so on and so forth. On our side, we are conscious of the suffering and it is worth it. And and it is also likely on your side of the house that you guys are going to give up since the beginning. But in reality, let's see, there are many hardworking students succeed, right? And when they're asked, their testimony is they say, oh, I never imagined that I will go this far. Why? Because the opportunities exist, but you already pessimist in the first place. You need to struggle to find it, right? Thus, we say that struggle is okay and valid because this is a form of investment for my future, and it is my choice to struggle first so that in the future I have a better future. So now move on to my substantive, right? First, let's characterize why do we say that there will be equality exist in campuses? We say that when you get to certain universities, for example, when you study hard, when you try hard, you will become a good student, right? You will be involved in many benefiting activities, like, for example, researchers and competition. Why? Because campuses need great students, right? Thus, this will be the incentive for you to be able to be recruited by your lecturers and so on and so forth, right? We also say that the efforts will be equals to the result even when you're still in campuses. And let's talk about the scholarships, right? They always say that scholarships not enough. Yes, we understand, right? But if you really want to get this, you will get it. Why? Let's analyze how many scholarships now in Indonesia, for example, BI, Beasiswa NTB, you're able to go abroad and so on and so forth, right? Why? Because government gives this kind of scholarships because they do need the specialists. Now, we do not see any characteristic of job market in their side of the house adjudicators. Now let's characterize job market, right? We say that this will bring the good future for all stakeholders in a whole country, as a country, government, society, and also the student. Let's say society from developing country also needs specialists. Let's look at in times of pandemic COVID-19, right? We need specialists. If you do not have the specialists, well, if we have less doctors and so on and so forth, for example, like what is happening, we say that the accessibility is lesser, right? Thus, the society will suffer, and they also have to go to international specialists, like what have been mentioned by my first speaker. We say that this is very expensive, right? It is unaccessible by all societies. Now, comparatively, the job market on our side is government is not only providing you scholarship, but they also provide opportunity of job, like for example, PNS. Why? Because the government is trying to look for the specialists to be able to distribute them to rural areas in Indonesia, for example. Thus, the people who live in rural areas will be more easier to access this kind of specialists. Thus, this society will have better access to the specialists, right? Thus, we say that in a whole, it is better for all stakeholders that I have mentioned. So let's compare, right? On your side, students will give up easily, like what I have said, right? And also there will be less specialists just because you say, oh, it is very expensive and so on and so forth. But we say that a lot of society already aware of this, on how, like for example, my mother want to sell all of their assets for me because they are aware that education, it is okay to suffer, it is okay to sell all my assets first, but later in the future I'm going to have a better life, I'm going to fix my future family and also I will buy things, for example, for my parents and so on and so forth, right? Thus, if you do not have this capacity and incentive, it is bad for government, society, and students as a whole. So yeah, we say that also the characteristic of the developing countries itself, right? You cannot say that only looking at the realistic things such as we do not have equality in campuses and also in job opportunities, because if you do good in campuses, if you do good in your job, it is not only 1 or 2% that will see how your job, how you are doing. There will be a whole community. If in your job, your consumers, your the people that use your services will see it, and if you're good, they will go to you. Even if there are better people, for example, richer people, if they're not serving good services, they're not going to go there. Thus, under all those reasons, we're very proud to become a specialist. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the leader of opposition. To respond to the case, I'd like to invite the government with. To the government with, time and place are yours.
Am I audible? Hello? Am I audible?
Yes, you are audible.
Yes, you are.
So I'll start my speech in 3, 2, 1. Ladies and gentlemen, let's first talk about the students, which is our main actor as in this motion, as an average student from a lower socioeconomic class, right? Okay, then so first of all, let's try to talk about the students, right? The government side of the house is trying to bring that by giving that being a specialist is already easy enough in the status quo in the developing country, right? Well, but we believe this is not, as an average socioeconomic and a lower socioeconomic student, we believe that we don't have this kind of capabilities for us to actually achieve this kind of degree or this kind of scholarship, ladies and gentlemen. Let's just give an example, right? Imagine that we have the brain capabilities, right? Even though that you are smart, even though that you have the ability to actually get lolos as an MPTN, for example, you still have to pay that money towards the college or towards the institution itself, right? But now we are, as an average student, we are not that smart, so it is really unachievable. Now let's talk about, even if we have money, right? Even if we have the capability of the money, you still need to have that kind of big brain to actually try to survive in that kind of condition, the condition where it is very competitive and where it's very many competition. You just can fall like that easily. But now we are, as an average student, that is not that smart, that is just mediocre, something like that. So it is more hardly for us to get this kind of this kind of things, right? Okay, then the government side of the house can say that there is progressive or example scholarship. But ladies and gentlemen, this scholarship has many competitions. Then the competition that we are facing right now is the ones who are very, very rich, the ones who have the ability to hire a tutor, to have that kind of smart brain, to hire teachers and etc. Right? Well, we are just a normal student. What can we do against them, right? And then they also, and for example, like they bring the internal medicine specialist. Yes, and for example, in Indonesia, right? You need to become smart enough to actually to actually get the scholar, to actually get to the into institution. But even though you have gone to the institution, you still need to pay that 200 million rupiah for your institution itself, right? Now let's talk about our developing country itself, ladies and gentlemen. Why being a generalist is better for our country itself. When you become a generalist, you can actually go to many kind of stuff, right? And why does our country actually need generalists more than specialists? They try to bring up the case of specialists is not enough, but we do believe, even though the specialist is already enough, and it is not our responsibility because we are not capable of that, just like what we stated before. And then even though the specialist is not enough, we believe that the ones who are actually giving the most income towards the developing country itself is, for example, the PNS or etc. Right? Not the doctors that are there going to bring, because for example, like the doctors that they always bring in this motion, the money that the doctors get will straight away get to themselves, right? Not go to the country first and then go to the doctor itself. So the profit that the developing country is actually getting more is by this generous stuff from the lower class jobs and etc. Right, ladies and gentlemen? And then now let's compare with the generalist and the specialist career path, ladies and gentlemen. When you become both generalist and specialist, it won't guarantee you a job, right? Even though you are the smart, it doesn't mean that you will straight away get a job. But why in our case it is more okay, right? Because at least in our case, we have a plan B. For example, you want to become a doctor, but you have failed to achieve that kind of thing, right? We still have a plan B because we are generalists. You can be other stuff, or we can work in other jobs, we can work in other places because we know many things. We don't know only one thing, we know many stuff, right? So we believe it is more safer for us to actually be that. And then being a generalist doesn't mean that you are straight away poor. You don't have any food, you don't have any money or income to actually support your life, to actually support your life. Because when you become a generalist, you still get the job, you still get that kind of income. Even though you lost the job, you have a chance to get another job more likely than you become a specialist, right? And then we also believe as an average student, it is very highly unachievable to actually achieve this kind of specialist degree itself, right? Because first of all, when you become a specialist, the tendency of yourself to become a stress is more likely because of the high competition from the unfair starting points from the other people, from your friends or from your classmates, right? So the tendency of you being give up that the government, that the opposition is trying to bring is more likely in their side, right? Because you are likely to be more stressed and and something like that. Then now let's talk about the analysis from the opposition side. First of all, they mistake the analysis of the process of being a degree. They as if talk as being a degree is like a piece of cake, right? It's like so easy itself, right, ladies and gentlemen? But we believe that they have failed to explain. So the only reason they bring is, for example, the economic progressive and the accessibility towards, for example, scholarship and etc. But just like what I stated before, this kind of thing it is not enough because of the high competition. And then they try to bring that your parents can actually support you by selling the sawa or selling their stuff, right? But why would we think it is morally wrong as for us as the average in social income students, right? As the kid, what we are supposed to do when we grow up, we are supposed to actually repay our parents back, right? And we want to do it as fast as we can. We must do it before they're dead, for example, right? So the fastest way for us to do this is becoming generalist, and that's why we think by being a generalist is important, because we need to get that money fast, and also because we also have expenses in our life. Like for example, we must pay our wangkas, for example, when we are in school, or we have to buy cat, or example, right, which is not really accessible for us, for a social lower income student, right? So we also need to pay this expense. We also need to actually repay our parents in the near future. So we must actually get this job very fast, and we believe by by being a generalist, it is more easier for us to get a job, which is our main priority as an average social lower economic students, right? And then second of all, they mistaken the economic growth from the specialist itself. Let's see. Okay, then we do admit that in these developing countries, the specialist is not enough, ladies and gentlemen. But why, even though the specialist is not enough, that the generals can actually solve this kind of thing? Right? Why does the general society can still solve this thing? Because by being a generalist, what we are pushing is more towards the money of the lower class itself, right? When, let's say, in the developing countries, one of the characteristics is they are unemployed and they are mostly poor and many poverty cases, right? So what we are supposed to be driven, what we are supposed to push as a developing country is to actually increase the poverty or to increase the lower economic status itself, not the specialty, not the specialist itself, ladies and gentlemen. And that is why I'm proud to propose this motion. Thank you.
Thank you for the speech. To respond the case, I'd like to invite the opposition whip. Without any further ado, time and place are yours. Baru Kak Gohmut tadi.
Hello. Am I audible?
Yes.
Ini
Can you speak
kameranya nggak
louder,
bisa, Cak.
please?
Ya.
Speak louder, please. Opposition.
We cannot start the video, dia bilang. Failed.
Maaf Kak, maksudnya
Yeah.
kasih ketek. Gak apa-apa ngomong.
Yeah, it's okay. Maybe you.
Hello.
Yeah, just
yeah,
go.
Kak, I think we have problem in camera.
Ngomong.
Timer dong.
It's okay as long
Not
as your
responding to
audio
Zoom.
is clear.
Can you? Ini cengin pakai HP lah.
Ada bisa. Timer dong. Thank you. Gak apa-apa dah, Cak. Oh.
Louder, Ching.
So, I'm going to
Don't be
start
loyo-loyo.
in 3, 2, 1. Ladies and gentlemen, we don't understand that the government side of the house being dismissed. The government side of the house being dismissive to this average students coming from the lower economic class society. As the students coming from lower economic society, I feel so offended that they said that we are as the average student that cannot go pursue even higher education and cannot compete with the smarter student coming from the richer family, ladies and gentlemen, because we think that we are able, because we understand that in the status quo the education has already feasible, ladies and gentlemen. That's why we think that the idea that they brought about the risky competition is not going to be there, because of the education has already been feasible for every layer of society now, ladies and gentlemen. Second of all, the third speaker mentioned about developing country got benefit from generalists, ladies and gentlemen. This is how has already been argued from the very first speaker until the second speaker also. We think that it is never clear how that they are going to through this pursuing generalists, that how they are going to even touch the idea of developing country being benefited through this generalists, ladies and gentlemen. Because notice, as working as waitress, for example, working as receptionist, as generalists, ladies and gentlemen, we think that you are going to have lower income. It means that you are not going to be able to contribute further for your countries, ladies and gentlemen. We think that you are not going to be able to boost further economic status in your countries, in developing countries, ladies and gentlemen. And about the idea of competition in specialist is being hard, it is being questioned by the government side of the house. We say no. Even if you are competing in the status quo, being as a specialist, we think that you may have your own unique as an additional value, ladies and gentlemen. That this is how that you are going to be able to survive at the end of the day. How that you are going to be able to survive with this own unique, ladies and gentlemen. Even if, for example, I work as psychologist and Biasma also work as psychologist, also Icha work as psychologist, for example, but the three of us may have different unique side, ladies and gentlemen. We may have different approaches in order to do our job, for example, ladies and gentlemen. That's how we are able to survive in the end of the day in the status quo, ladies and gentlemen. That's how we are able to for example, attract our the consumers of our services at the end of the day. That's why we think that the idea of competition would be able to be achieved under our side. However, the idea of competition is not going to be achieved under their side because it is going to be worse in the government side of the house because you don't even have specific value to sell to attract others' attention, ladies and gentlemen. Once a job vacancy ran out, for example, or not available, it is harder to find another. Even if, for example, your boss, for example, see another person with greater effort to work in that job, for example, it is likely that your boss is going to kick you from the company. That's why we think that it is unlikely the competition in your side is going to be even worse because you are going to be very like in spreading job vacancy. Even right now that the job vacancy has already been so limited, ladies and gentlemen. And also they question about the idea how lower economic students could pursue specialist career, ladies and gentlemen. Later on, I'm going to explain this question on my substantial. And they question about the idea of graduation of university is enough, ladies and gentlemen. But we think in the status quo, university students is, yes, it is not enough, but because the status quo demands you to have very specific specialty with higher education. Then suddenly they mention about the idea they don't have even think to continue their higher education. No, because in the status quo is progressing because why? The government is providing scholarships. For example, beasiswa NTB, AAS, LPDP, even for example, Erasmus than other countries that is providing, ladies and gentlemen. Let's see the example. Kak Tanti, Kak Tiwi, Kak Juju able to achieve this Erasmus beasiswa NTB, ladies and gentlemen. That's how we think that this proves to you that education is very feasible for you, ladies and gentlemen. Moving on to the idea that at the very first place they say that it costs a lot of money, ladies and gentlemen. Let's see another example that really coming from lower economic society. Siti Rohimah, for example, the daughter of tukang becak that can pursue higher education or pursue PhD program in England, ladies and gentlemen. We understand that PhD program is very expensive. Even poor society, it proves to you, even poor society could able go to pursue expensive education, ladies and gentlemen. And let's see, when they argue about the idea of countries and the gap between poor and poverty is there, ladies and gentlemen. The poor and the rich society is there, ladies and gentlemen. We think that the question is that they never explain is that how in their side they could achieve they could eradicate the idea of the gap between poor and poverty. However, we know that the income that coming from this generalist is very small, ladies and gentlemen. Even further, that the idea of specialists that making more specialist service, for example, like Dr. Bedah or something like that, is very expensive in the status quo. We think that this is the reason why the gap exists, and they cannot solve that under the government side of the house. However, we think that in the opposition we are able to eradicate, we are able to at least minimize this, because in the status quo, the reason why the gap exists is because of the poor is not having access to rich service from specialists, because it is because we are having a lack in developing country of specialists, ladies and gentlemen. That's why the cost of the specialist service becoming so expensive. That's the reason why the gap exists, ladies and gentlemen. In opposition, we think that this is also the reason why we would like to pursue specialist career in also not only because it is promising, but because of we have another agenda. We want to make specialist service becoming more accessible to the poor. How? If most poor then pursue specialist careers, career, it means that we are going to have more people in this site with specialty, ladies and gentlemen. Realistically, it is how we are going to be able to provide welfare to the poor and minimize the gap, because we are going to have more specialists in our side of the house. In that side, we are going to make the price of this specialist service being more accessible for this poor at the end of the day, ladies and gentlemen. That's how we are going to be able to minimize the gap of the poor and the rich family itself. That's how we are also going to attract investor, and because these developing countries shows progress, ladies and gentlemen. Moving on to my substantive and further rebuttal, intertwined. We see that in the status quo, the accessibility of education is progressing, while the status quo shows that the government is struggling to provide accessible education for the lower economic class society. For example, providing a scholarship like Bidik Misi, BU, PPA, etc. You can name it by yourself. And companies also are going in this side in order to provide accessible education. We think as society, we need to appreciate this progress, especially as lower class society that being targeted by all of this program. We need to pursue higher education, because right now we are able to compete financially. We are able to choose to either go for being generalist or specialist. It is needed for us to talk and consider taking specialists as strategic way to develop first ourselves, second family economy, and lastly we are going to be able to improve country's advancement. We are going to be able to support them. We think as students, we are going to be very beneficial, because as specialists right now is very promising, because we are really lacking of specialists in developing nations. For example, like Dr. Bedah, psychology expert, etc. We think that the income is very high. That's why we think that it is very promising. Therefore, at the end of the day, we are going to be able to raise our family economy. This is also how that we are going to be able to improve our quality of life of our country. Comparison, generalist is easy to get the job, ladies and gentlemen. But they are also going to be
Time
easy
is
to lose
up.
it, because they are only going to fill lower place in company.
Time is up.
The different type of the specialists, because we are the only expert in that side, that our consumers
Time is up.
looking for us. That's why
Order.
we proudly oppose this motion. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the speech. For the last one, I'd like to invite the replay speaker from the opposition to take the conclusion. Time and place are yours.
Am I audible?
Yes, Queen.
Okay. Okay. I'm gonna start my speech in 3, 2, 1. Member of the House, the government were always talking about the gaps that happens in the lower income students, right? But we think that that's argument is less relevant, right? Because we think that the progressivity of the government that is more aware towards the issues that they are facing about, that they're lacking of the specialists, that is important for the stability of our country in the future, right? Unlike the government that is being dismissive and denial, that they said that we actually have enough specialists, but the question is, if we have enough specialists, then they have to explain to me why then the healthcare that's taking care by the specialist doctor less accessible to different layer of the society. For example, like BPJS couldn't even cover that, right? You only provided only the doctor umum, for example. That's only a small example that we are actually lacking of the specialists. That's the reason why there is a gap when it comes to accessibility to certain kind of service, right? The idea that's also talking about the idea of competitions, they say that if you are becoming the specialist, then you are going to compete. But we think that the idea of competition is not mutually exclusive, right? Even under their side of the house, the competition is still there, even it's higher, right? Because we think that the people who are graduating from generally school or college is higher compared to the compare to the person who is graduating from specialist things, right? So therefore, we think that the idea of competitions is going to be worse under their sub the house. That's the reasons why a lot of generalists they are being jobless, right? Because they do not because the competition is very high, right? Instead, unlike the opposite, unlike the government, we think that we actually have enough generalists, right? That's the reasons why we have a lot of labor, for example, because they can only work the general things that most of people can do, right? We think that it's important for us, as you know, like they're also talking about the idea of equality, right? They say that, oh, if you are coming from lower middle students, lower income students, then you are going, it's gonna be hard for you to compete with people. There are people who are smarter than you and richer for you. But we don't think that is actual, but we don't think it's not only about you are being smart or not, but it's about your hard work, right? It's about your effort to pursue that. That's the reasons why a lot of people are coming from lower middle class family, that they can be better, right? Because because of their hard work, right? So we think that these people can still actually pursue that. All right, let's talk about the idea of the interest of other countries also to help developing country to so the students can can pursue the specialist career, because we think that the interest of developed countries, for example, that they would like to invest or create business into the developing country. So they think that it is important for them to invest something onto developing country like Indonesia. Like there is AAS, for example. There's also whatever scholarship that could give to the Indonesians, so that Indonesians could give Indonesians could have better specialists, better human resources. Like we know that Indonesia actually have a lot of human resources and natural resources, right? But the problem is that the human resources is not good enough to handle the abundance of natural resources that we have. That's the reasons why Free Report, for example, a lot of people who are controlling that are expatriate, are foreigners, right? So we think that if we can. So therefore, we think that it's better if the country could actually provide more specialists for the betterment of our country. We are very proud to oppose.
Yay, thank you very much for the replay speaker from the opposition team. I'd like to call upon the replay speaker from the government team. Time and place are yours.
Am I audible?
Yes, Queen.
Okay. I'm going to start my speech in 3, 2, 1. Two questions in this debate is first, which option is more realistic for us as a student that is average from a low-income family that lives in a developing country? And second, which option actually gives more benefits for us, our life, and to improve our country later on? Side opposition's ideas consist of first, that they believe that our country lacks the needs of specialists, which is why we as the lower income students should actually try to pursue this. First, I've mentioned to you that the lack of specialists that our country needs right now is still okay. It's still enough. And even if the country really lacks, my second speaker has already explained to you how it doesn't have to be the burden for us. It doesn't have to be us as the low income average student to actually have to pursue to become these specialists themselves. We believe that there are other actors that can actually solve this problem of the lack of needs of specialists in a certain country. Second, they mentioned about how becoming a specialist is already accessible in our country. We believe that that is very easy because there are scholarship and etc. But first, we've mentioned to you that is a very assumptive argument first, because in scholarship, it is very clear now that the main criteria you have to be is you have to be smart. You have to have something different from other students, something that we as an average student cannot achieve, which will make our way hard. Hardworking will not be enough, because now it is not, because the main priority of these organizations is to only find smart students that are promising. So we believe that their argument on how being specialist is becoming more accessible for people is very irrelevant now, especially with our condition to become a low income and average students specifically. Second of all, they mentioned about how being a specialist would actually guarantee a better future for them. They said that when you become a specialist, you would actually get more income because it is a job that is very hard to find. But first, team opposition failed to put themselves in the shoes as a low-income average student, because first we do not have the capability to actually go against these smart students to actually get the same results or the good specialty as them, and we do not have the same money. So we believe that our scenario itself will be better for us to get a guaranteed future, which is just enough as in line with our intentions or our needs as a low-income student, which is not to live a life full of glory and other things, but just to get our ends meet in the end of the day, which is why we believe that our proposal as a whole is more realistic for us as a low-income and average students. And we believe that the option set becoming a generalist gives more benefits for us, as it gives us flexibility in doing many jobs, which, for example, if we actually lose a job, we can still pursue another job because we have enough information about all of these sectors, especially now, as we have mentioned to you before, in developing country, the job opportunities are still very shaky. Even if you're a specialist, if something happens such as the pandemic, you can still lose your job in a very easy way, which is why we believe that when you actually have the capability to do more jobs, you will actually give more benefits for you when you live in a developing country for your life, since you will have a stable income. Even though it is not as much as how you will get as a specialist, it is enough to get your intentions or your needs, which is to at least eat or get your ends meet or provide for your parents itself. And we believe that and we have mentioned to you that being a generalist actually improves the country's economic more, because the income that comes in will go more to the country rather than a specialist, when most of the income will come to you. So we believe that from all these sectors, our proposal is more realistic and more better for the people. Proud to propose.
Thank you very much. I'd like to end this debate by saying you guys need to turn on or unmute your speaker, because I want to hear big applause from the audience and from the adjudicators and of course from the participants. Okay.
Thank you, everyone. Yay,
Finally,
yay,
we come to the end. But first thing first, the adjudicators would like to take their own time to create their decisions, and I want you guys, all the participants and the audience, to stay in the main room, because the adjudicators will go to the breakout room to create the decisions, and after that we are going to announce who's going to be the winner of these mini competitions. So yeah, thank you very much. I'm Iwan Suryadi. I'm heading out. Thank you.
I'm
Thank
Iwan
you.
Jenner. Iwan Jenner.
Iwan Kardashian.
Iwan Kardashian. Should we stay or leave?
No, just stay.
Okay.
All audience and also debater, you can stay in main hall because adjudicator
Main room.
will allocate to breakout room.
Iqbal?
Are we going to assign to breakout room? Well, breakout room.
Oh, ini belum breakout room ya?
Tak masukin saya juga. Mana nggak ada?
Belum breakout room. Stop recording dulu. Stop recording dulu, Cing.